Welcome to today's podcast, where we're diving into the fascinating intersection of electric vehicle, battery chemistry, and global supply chains. Dr. 60, Fuchs, can you start by explaining how the choice of battery chemistry can influence a vehicle maker's vulnerability to supply chain disruptions?
Absolutely. The chemistry chosen for an EV battery, especially the cathode material, determines which critical minerals are needed, like lithium, cobalt, nickel, and manganese. Each mineral has its own global production hotspots, so a design relying heavily on, say, cobalt exposes manufacturers to different geopolitical and logistical risks than one centered on lithium iron phosphate.
That's interesting. So, if we think of the battery as a recipe, changing the ingredients alters where and how you might run into shortages. Could you give us an example comparing two common chemistries?
Certainly. Take NMC, which stands for nickel, manganese, cobalt, and LFP, or lithium iron phosphate. NMC batteries require all four critical minerals, while LFP relies mainly on lithium. Because of this, NMC's supply chain has more points of potential disruption. It's like having four possible weak links instead of one, each tied to different countries and their unique supply dynamics.
As we transition to discussing the actual flows of these minerals, how does the global distribution of mining and processing further complicate these vulnerabilities?
That's a crucial point. Mining is often geographically dispersed. Australia leads in lithium, the DRC in cobalt, Indonesia in nickel, and South Africa in manganese. However, the real complication arises in the midstream. China dominates refining and processing across almost all these minerals, regardless of where the raw material is mined.
So, even if diverse countries mine the minerals, most of the refining bottlenecks converge in China. Can you illustrate this with some real-world numbers for, say, lithium supply chains?
Absolutely. In 2020, Australia mined about 49% of the world's lithium, but 99% of that was shipped to China for refining. Ultimately, 59% of global battery-grade lithium was refined in China, and China produced 90% of LFP cathodes. So even if mining is diversified, almost all roads lead to China by the time the materials are ready for battery production.
That's a powerful analogy. It's like multiple tributaries feeding into a single river. Does this concentration mean that disruptions in one country can ripple through the entire EV industry?
Exactly. Since so much refining and cathode production occurs in China, any disruption there, be it geopolitical tension, trade policy, or natural disaster, can impact a large share of global EV battery production, regardless of where the initial mining occurs.
Let's delve further into how researchers quantify and compare these vulnerabilities across supply chains.
To systematically compare supply chain risks, we use a vulnerability index. This index calculates what percentage of a battery's cathode material relies on a particular country at any step mining, refining, or manufacturing. It accounts for direct and indirect trade flows and even uncertainty in data, like missing or misclassified shipments.
So, it's a bit like a stress test for supply chains, showing not just obvious risks, but also hidden dependencies. How did this play out in the study's comparison between LFP and NMC chemistries?
In the base case, about 92% of LFP cathode production and 80% for NMC was vulnerable to disruptions in China. These numbers could rise to nearly 100% in the worst-case scenarios, especially when factoring in indirect trade and missing data. Even moving manufacturing out of China wouldn't eliminate risk, since refined materials often still originate there.
That's eye-opening. Are there any minerals or countries outside China with similarly outsized influence?
Yes. The DRC accounts for most cobalt and South Africa for manganese. But in terms of vulnerability indices, China's dominance is unique because it spans multiple minerals and several supply chain stages. For cobalt and nickel, Russia and the DRC can also pose major risks, especially if trade flows are less transparent.
Given these insights, what strategies can companies or policymakers consider to reduce systemic risk?
A multi-pronged approach is essential. First, diversifying both the geographic sources and processing locations can help. For example, the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act incentivizes domestic and allied production, but the study shows that focusing on just one stage, like final assembly, isn't enough if upstream refining remains concentrated elsewhere.
That suggests policy needs to be holistic, addressing not just where batteries are built, but where every ingredient comes from and is processed. Could shifting battery chemistry, like favoring LFP over NMC, lower these risks?
Potentially. LFP uses fewer critical minerals, simplifying the supply chain and potentially reducing multi-point vulnerabilities. However, unless lithium refining and LFP cathode production are diversified away from China, the risk remains high. Recent discoveries of large lithium deposits in the U.S., for example, could provide new options if developed alongside refining capacity.
What about other strategies, like investing in recycling or developing alternative chemistries?
Absolutely. Circular economy approaches like recycling battery materials can reduce reliance on primary mining. Supporting R&D for new chemistries that use more abundant or regionally available materials can also build resilience. Ultimately, transparent data and international cooperation are key for tracking vulnerabilities and responding proactively to emerging risks.
Thank you for this in-depth exploration. It's clear that battery chemistry choices have far-reaching effects on national security, business continuity, and the global transition to clean transportation.